My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 32 years old. I'm a software engineer living in New York City, far away from the dusty little town in Texas where I was born and raised. I don't go back often, but last month I flew home for my father's birthday thinking maybe this year would be different. I spent days planning the trip, handpicking a bottle of his favorite whiskey, and baking the kind of chocolate cake he used to ask for every year when I was a kid. I even printed out a framed photo from the one fishing trip we took together when I was 12, back when things still felt possible between us. I was determined to make it meaningful, a gesture, an olive branch maybe. I walked into the backyard where the family had gathered. My father was on his second beer. My mother was hovering with a tray of deviled eggs, and my brother Matt was holding court with some old friends from high school. I smiled, stepped up to Dad, handed him the cake and the gift, and said, "Happy birthday, Dad." He looked at me straight in the eye and said, "You know what would actually be the best gift, Emily, if you just disappeared from our lives?" Everyone went quiet. Even the wind stopped. He wasn't joking. He meant it. And everyone just stood there like it was normal. I smiled. I set the cake down carefully. I walked out of the yard without saying a word. 1 hour later, the police showed up and arrested my father in front of the entire party. You're probably wondering what happened, why he got arrested, why I didn't scream or cry or fight back in that moment. But trust me, I had something much better planned. I didn't grow up in a city of ambition or progress. I grew up in a small conservative town in Texas where family reputation mattered more than truth, and being a daughter often meant being invisible. My father, Edward Carter, used to run a car dealership. He was the kind of man who wore his pride like a badge and treated authority as his birthright. After the business folded during the 2008 crash, he never quite recovered, not financially, and definitely not emotionally. But instead of rebuilding, he turned bitter. My mother, Susan, was the quiet kind, sweet on the surface, but always standing behind my father, even when his words cut like knives. She had a way of dismissing my pain as overreaction, of asking me to understand where he's coming from, as though understanding made it hurt less. Then there's my older brother Matt, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong even when he was deep in debt, failing business after business. He called it serial entrepreneurship. I called it recklessness funded by other people's patience, and mostly by my bank account. From the moment I left home at 18, with a scholarship in hand, I was on my own. I took care of myself, built a life, paid my way, and somehow, despite everything, still felt obligated to help them. I sent money when Matt's restaurant failed. I co-signed a loan when Dad's truck was repossessed. I paid off Mom's hospital bill when her insurance didn't cover everything. Not once did they say thank you. Instead, it was always, "You think you're better than us now," or "just because you live in New York doesn't mean you know how real families work." I used to excuse it. I told myself they were just struggling, that they didn't know how to express gratitude, that maybe someday they'd finally see me as more than the backup plan. But as the years passed and the requests for money grew bolder, and the phone calls only came when they needed something, a part of me began to shift. Quietly, slowly. I stopped asking for updates. I stopped volunteering information about my life. I knew if I mentioned a raise or a promotion, it would only mean another favor was coming. What made it worse was how little they respected me for what I'd built. My career was just playing with computers. My apartment was a shoebox in a crime-ridden city. My independence was a phase, and because I didn't marry or have kids by 30, my mother once whispered to me over Thanksgiving dinner, "Maybe it's time to accept that you'll end up alone." I smiled that night, just like I smiled at my father's birthday party. But deep inside, I was taking notes, not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because I needed to understand the shape of their disdain before I could ever free myself from it. For years, I kept waiting for a moment of recognition, some sign that they saw me not just the paycheck I represented, but the human being who loved them in spite of how they treated me. That moment never came. And so I stopped waiting. When my father looked me in the eye on his birthday and told me the best gift would be for me to disappear, he had no idea how much power he'd just handed me. Because I wasn't just his daughter. I was his creditor, his co-signer, his silent savior. And I was done pretending I wasn't. The truth is, my family never saw me as a person. I was a function, a fallback, the emergency fund they didn't have to earn. After I landed my first job in New York, my mother called me 3 months later crying about medical bills. "They won't let me leave the hospital unless I pay this amount today," she said. I wired her the money within the hour. No questions asked. A year later, Matt called after his latest startup failed. "Emily, it's just a short-term loan. I'm launching something way more scalable this time," he said. He needed $10,000. I gave him 12. I never saw a cent of it back. Every few months there was something else. A missed rent, a car repair, a tax lien. And somehow, I always picked up the pieces. Not because I wanted to, but because I'd been conditioned to. Conditioned by a family that told me I owed them for raising me, for giving me food and shelter, for letting me leave for college as if that were a gift and not something I earned through scholarships and work-study programs. My father never once acknowledged my achievements. When I was promoted to team lead, he muttered, "That's nice. So when are you getting married?" When I paid off my student loans in full, he said, "Well, with that salary, I'd expect nothing less." My mother repeated his words, softened them around the edges, but never disagreed. And Matt, he simply took, smiling, charming with that familiar line, "Your family, you do the same for me." Except he never did. When I struggled during the pandemic, working remote, anxious, and isolated, I didn't get a single message from them unless it was about money. Not even a "how are you?" One time I refused. Matt called in a fury, saying I'd left him stranded during a business launch. "I lost everything because of you," he said. "You're selfish." My parents agreed, said I was too successful for my own good, and that I'd forgotten what it meant to help people. That night I checked my email and found out Matt had opened a credit card under my name, one I never authorized. The debt was nearly $5,000. He'd used my social security number and my parents had known. They said it was just until he got back on his feet. That was the moment the switch flipped. I stopped wiring money. I stopped taking calls. But I didn't cut them off. Not yet. I began collecting everything: bank statements, emails, voicemails, contracts, old text messages. I hired a lawyer in New York to review the paper trail. She said, "Emily, you've got enough here to bury them." But I didn't want to bury anyone. I just wanted to reclaim myself. Still, I waited. Part of me hoped they'd reach out for something real, an apology maybe. But instead they sent me a photo of the family Christmas dinner, all smiling without me, with the caption, "Peaceful without the city stress." That's when I made the final decision. I started moving pieces into place quietly. I closed a joint savings account I had with my mother, one she begged me to open after her name was blacklisted from local banks. I froze the card Matt opened using my credit. I changed my passwords. I had all future financial interactions documented and verified. I knew it was only a matter of time before they noticed. And I knew when they did, they'd be furious. But I was past fear. I was planning. And everything changed the day my father told me to disappear. Because what he didn't realize was I already had a plan to do exactly that. Except this time it would come with consequences. I hadn't been home in nearly 2 years when I flew in for my father's birthday. Part of me debated not going at all. But something in me needed closure. Or maybe I just needed to see one last time if there was anything left to salvage. I arrived early, helped set up the table, arranged the cake, and placed the carefully wrapped gift beside his favorite chair. It was a watch. Not just any watch, a rare vintage model from the year he opened his first business, restored with care and engraved with the words, "Still your daughter." I'd found it through a private collector and paid more than I should have. I knew he loved watches. I thought maybe it would remind him of who I'd been trying to be all these years. The guests began arriving: old friends, neighbors, some distant cousins I barely recognized. My mother buzzed around the kitchen, pretending I didn't exist. Matt arrived late as usual and greeted me with a half smirk and a hollow, "Hey, stranger." I smiled, stayed composed, played the role they'd always expected. Quiet, polite, useful. When it was time for dinner, everyone gathered in the backyard under string lights and folding chairs. Someone gave a toast. Matt, of course. He raised his glass and said, "To Dad, the only man I know who can still teach us all how to be strong, even if some of us forgot where we came from." Everyone laughed. My father smiled proud. I sat silently, knowing exactly who that line was aimed at. Then it was my turn. I handed my father the box. He opened it, saw the watch, and for a brief second, I thought maybe I saw something soften in his face. But then he looked up dead into my eyes and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You know what would have been better than this overpriced crap if you finally left us alone? The best gift would be you disappearing from this family." No one said anything. No one flinched. Not even my mother. The laughter from earlier had faded into an uncomfortable stillness, but no one stood up for me. No one said, "That was too much." I looked at him, looked at all of them, and I smiled. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I stood up, picked up my purse, and said, "Wish granted." Then I walked away past the string lights, the smirks, the silence, out through the front gate and into the night. What they didn't know was that by morning, the man who told me to disappear would be the one escorted away in handcuffs, because I had finally decided to stop playing the role of the quiet daughter. I had decided it was time to become something else entirely. I checked into a hotel 15 minutes from the house, a quiet mid-range place off the interstate with a business center and a view of nothing in particular. I didn't need comfort. I needed a desk Wi-Fi and silence. I sat down with my laptop in a folder I had been building for 2 years, labeled plainly Family Exit Protocol. The name was a joke at first, a dark kind of humor only someone in my position would understand. But now it was real. And every document in that folder had a purpose. The first step was closing legal loopholes. Months earlier, I had discovered that my father had refinanced the house using my name as a co-signer without telling me. He used paperwork from a joint account my mother helped create under the guise of building family credit. But I had kept every email, every message, every forged document. My attorney had drafted a complaint weeks ago. All I had to do was send it in. I uploaded the files digitally signed and hit send. Complaint for fraud and unauthorized use of identity. The second step was my brother. Matt had not only opened a credit card in my name, but also registered a business under my social security number. It had been inactive, but the IRS had already flagged some irregularities when I filed my taxes. I had waited, quietly. Now it was time. I forwarded my file to the State Department of Taxation and Finance. Then I contacted my bank's fraud department. Within an hour, Matt's accounts linked to my identity were frozen pending investigation. Step 3 was the joint savings account I had stupidly agreed to open with my mother years ago. She had poor credit and said she needed a co-owner for a security deposit. That account now held close to 18,000 deposits I'd made withdrawals she took. Legally, I had full authority, so I withdrew everything and closed it. That money went directly into a new trust under my name, only managed by an attorney in New York. Then I scheduled one more call to the county clerk's office. I wanted a background check run on the property my father had refinanced. I needed verification that he'd used my credentials to secure that loan. The clerk confirmed what I already suspected. The signature didn't match the one on my driver's license. Forgery. I requested the loan documents be pulled for legal review. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. My body was on a kind of calm autopilot, the way it gets when you've trained for a moment so long that instinct replaces fear. Around 6 a.m., I emailed a statement to the local sheriff's department. My attorney had helped me draft it. It outlined the identity fraud, the forged paperwork, and the financial abuse I had endured. It included all the documentation neatly labeled. I didn't ask for anything except action. And I knew that based on the laws in Texas, what my father had done was a felony. Around 9 a.m., I got a confirmation from the sheriff's office. A patrol car would be dispatched that morning to serve a warrant based on the financial fraud case. I was told they might follow up with me for further statements, but the evidence was strong enough to move immediately. I closed my laptop and sat at the window of the hotel, watching the slow procession of cars on the service road. I imagined my father in the backyard laughing, maybe telling the story of how he put me in my place last night. Maybe they were still joking about me wondering if I'd call crying or send another check in a few days. They didn't know I'd finally stopped flinching. At 10:22 a.m., my phone buzzed. A neighbor, one who'd always liked me but never spoke up much, sent me a message. Cops just showed up. Your dad's yelling on the porch. What's going on? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Everything was going exactly according to plan. And for the first time in my life, I felt no guilt, only relief, because I hadn't retaliated in anger. I hadn't screamed broken things or stormed out in chaos. I'd walked away calmly with a smile, and I'd used the one language they never thought I understood: power structure law. My father once told me, "You're just emotional. That's your weakness." He was wrong. My emotion was never the weakness. It was the reason I endured. But my mind had always been the weapon. And now it was finally aimed in the right direction. The news spread quickly in our small Texas town. By noon, my father had been arrested, charged with financial fraud, identity theft, and filing false loan documents. The sheriff's office issued a formal statement that made it into the local paper, and by the following day, people were whispering about the Carter family, the once proud name now tied to criminal activity. I stayed in my hotel room, monitoring everything from a distance. I watched as my brother's business accounts were frozen. He tried to post a furious rant online about being unjustly targeted, but it was taken down within hours. The IRS had flagged him for investigation. My lawyer had already forwarded documentation of how he used my social security number to apply for vendor credit and emergency loans under false pretenses. That part wasn't even a civil matter, it was federal. My mother was the only one who hadn't yet faced consequences. But that changed when she tried to withdraw from the closed joint account and was told it no longer existed. She left a voicemail on my phone, sobbing, saying she didn't understand why I would do something so cruel, that everything they did was out of love, that family didn't turn on each other like this. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. What she called love, I had come to understand as manipulation. What they called family was just control dressed up in obligation. But the part that surprised me most was the fallout beyond the legal and financial. It was the silence. No one from my extended family reached out. No cousins, no aunts, no uncles. And that silence said more than any phone call ever could. They knew. They'd always known. They just didn't want to get involved. People don't like confronting dysfunction when it wears nice clothes and goes to church on Sundays. They'd rather pretend the daughter who left was the problem. But now, with the truth out there, was no hiding behind that version of the story anymore. My father spent 2 nights in county jail before he was released on bail. His mugshot was online. A friend sent me a screenshot asking if I was okay. I was more than okay. I was clear. My brother tried to contact me once through a mutual acquaintance, said he needed to talk, that he was being unfairly dragged into something he didn't fully understand. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the request to my attorney. She replied to him with a simple message: all future communication must go through legal counsel. My mother's text turned from guilt to anger, then back again. One moment she was begging me to remember our Christmases, our vacations, the good times. The next, she was blaming me for destroying what little dignity we had left. It wasn't until she sent the message saying, "Your father could die from the stress," that I blocked her number. I didn't want him to die. I just wanted him to stop stealing my life. I wanted them all to finally carry the weight of their own choices. And they were. Every day a new consequence arrived. Matt was under audit. Creditors were circling. My father's assets were frozen pending legal proceedings. Their house, the one I'd unknowingly co-signed for, was now subject to foreclosure if he couldn't produce alternate financing. And none of them could reach me. I had shut every door, locked every entry point. There was no more access to my money, my name, or my silence. And the world that had once revolved around using me as a fallback began to implode. The final nail came when the bank formally notified my father that the co-signature on his mortgage had been deemed invalid due to fraud. He was now solely liable for a loan he couldn't afford. My attorney had filed a claim to remove my name from all obligations. It was granted within a week, based on the strength of the evidence. He would lose the house unless he paid the full amount, and he couldn't. That property, the symbol of his authority, the space where he humiliated me in front of our entire family, was no longer his safe zone. It was now a burden he had to carry alone. The same neighbor who had texted me during the arrest later sent me another message: "They're packing up. Movers came this morning. I asked for nothing. I sent no responses. I just watched." The Carter family, once untouchable in their little town, was now unraveling, not because someone betrayed them, but because someone finally said no. And that someone was me. I didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves. I just stopped saving them. And in doing so, I saved myself. I spent the following weeks in quiet reflection, not in some spiritual retreat or dramatic montage, but in simple, ordinary solitude. I stayed in my hotel longer than I needed to, extended my reservation without hesitation, and woke up each morning not with panic, but with peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally stop negotiating your worth. I took long walks around the outskirts of town, places I used to avoid because they reminded me too much of who I used to be, a daughter trying too hard to be enough. But now those streets look different, familiar but no longer threatening. I was no longer seeking their approval, no longer hoping to be invited back into the inner circle of a family that never truly saw me. I'd always thought there would be a feeling of finality when I stood up for myself, a rush, a triumph. But the truth was more nuanced. It was quiet, like slipping out of a heavy coat you didn't know you were wearing. I remembered the early days in New York when I had just started my job, struggling with imposter syndrome and loneliness. I remembered my 27th birthday when no one in my family called. That same year, I'd wired money to cover Matt's second failed business. I remembered sitting on my apartment floor, tears rolling down my face as I stared at my phone, waiting for a text that never came. That was the moment I began to question the definition of family I'd been raised with. The idea that blood meant loyalty, that silence meant respect, that self-sacrifice was love. But now I knew better. Love without respect isn't love. It's compliance. And I had complied for too long. I thought about my father's words, how he told me to disappear, not knowing that I'd been fading from their lives for years, not out of spite, but out of survival. Every small withdrawal I made over the years wasn't just financial. It was emotional. It was psychological. It was me reclaiming, inch by inch, the space they took from me. And now, standing on the other side of everything, I didn't feel like a villain. I felt like a survivor. My mother once told me, "You're too sensitive. That's why you overreact to everything." But sensitivity was never the problem. It was the reason I noticed the quiet cruelty. The reason I couldn't pretend that casual insults were jokes. The reason I remembered the tone of their voices, not just their words. That sensitivity had turned into clarity, and that clarity had turned into action. I didn't dismantle my family out of bitterness. I dismantled the lie that I owed them my silence, my money, my forgiveness, while they gave nothing in return. The truth is, I never wanted revenge. I wanted freedom. I wanted to stop carrying the emotional debt they kept collecting. And now that I had it, I wasn't interested in looking back. I wasn't watching to see if they changed. I wasn't waiting for an apology, because the story was no longer about them. It was about me, rewritten, finally. 6 months passed before I heard from them again. It came through a lawyer's office in Texas, an official letter requesting a meeting to discuss the restoration of familial relationships and resolution of outstanding matters. I almost laughed. Restoration. After everything. But I agreed, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I wanted clarity. I flew back dressed in a fitted gray blazer and black trousers, hair tied neatly, face calm. I met them in a private conference room at a neutral legal office downtown, the kind of place where emotions don't matter unless they're in writing. My father looked older, not frail, but smaller. My mother sat beside him, eyes darting from the floor to me and back again. Matt wasn't there. I didn't ask why. Their lawyer opened with polite introductions. Then my father spoke. We thought it might be time to ease some of the tension, he said, voice stiff. There's no need for this to go on forever. I waited. I let the silence stretch long and patient. My mother leaned forward. Emily, we just want to put all this behind us. Family is family after all. I leaned back. Which part do you want to put behind you? The fraud, the identity theft, or the part where you told me I was never part of this family unless I was paying for it? My father's jaw tightened. We were under pressure. Things weren't easy. I nodded. And yet none of you thought to ask how I was doing. Not once. The lawyer cleared his throat. My clients are hoping for some form of reconciliation, perhaps even a path forward. I looked at him, then at them. There is no path forward. Not as it was. You lost access to me the day you weaponized my love against me, my mother whispered. But we're still your parents. No, I said quietly. You were. Now you're just people I used to know. My father's pride flickered, tried to reassert itself. You think cutting us off makes you strong? I smiled without warmth. No. It makes me free. I stood. We're done here. Any further contact can go through my lawyer. I turned and walked out, not with rage but with complete unwavering certainty. Outside, the air smelled of rain. The wind had picked up. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Some endings are quiet. Some confrontations aren't explosive. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Just leave them sitting in the silence they created for themselves. 2 weeks after that final meeting, I moved to a small town in Oregon, nestled between pine-covered hills and fog-draped valleys. I found a modest cabin overlooking a lake just outside a quiet community where nobody knew my name, my past, or the history I had finally buried. The place was small, but perfect. A single bedroom, wide windows, and a porch that creaked when the wind rolled in at dusk. I furnished it myself slowly, deliberately. Each item I brought in was chosen with care, without compromise, or anyone's judgment hanging over it. For the first time, everything in my space reflected me. My work continued software projects, remote clients, daily video calls. But now, instead of code being a distraction from stress, it became something else. Structure, certainty, a kind of ritual healing. I brewed coffee every morning and watched the mist roll off the lake. I spent afternoons writing planting small herbs in clay pots. I bought a used bike and started riding along the gravel paths behind the cabin. The wind in my face, no one yelling my name or asking for a favor. I applied for a legal name change. Not the first name I kept, Emily. That was mine. But the last name Carter that went away. I chose a new one that meant freedom in a language I barely spoke. It was symbolic, practical, emotional. One step closer to cutting off every legal thread still tying me to the people who once used my identity as their playground. My lawyer handled the paperwork. When the judge approved it, I felt nothing dramatic, just a quiet exhale, as though my body had been waiting for this moment all along. I deleted old contacts, archived emails, moved files into encrypted storage I never had to look at again. It was a digital cleansing that matched the physical one. I even changed my phone number. The only people who had the new one were those I chose to let in. I joined a local book club, started volunteering at a community tech center once a week, taught seniors how to use their phones, how to scan documents, how to not fall for phishing scams. They called me the quiet one but smiled when I showed up. No one knew what I'd done, what I'd walked away from. They just saw a woman building a life on her own terms. One morning, standing on my porch with a steaming cup of coffee, I thought about my old life not with longing or anger, but with clarity. I didn't regret helping them. I regretted how long it took me to stop. I regretted how much I gave to people who saw generosity as weakness. But I didn't regret walking away. Not for a second. Some people say it's lonely living alone starting over. But I wasn't alone. I had myself. And that was someone I could finally trust. The noise was gone. The guilt, the obligation, the subtle insults dressed up as concern, all gone. What remained was a woman who had finally chosen herself, not as an act of defiance, but as an act of healing, a rebirth in silence, a home built not on loyalty to others, but loyalty to truth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving. I was living fully, finally, on my own terms. Sometimes people say blood is thicker than water, as if that makes betrayal more acceptable, as if being related grants them immunity from consequence. But I've learned something else: respect is thicker than blood. And when that's gone, all you're left with is a shared last name and a history of wounds no one ever apologized for. I didn't walk away from my family because I hated them. I walked away because they refused to see me beyond what I could provide. Because every attempt at love was met with expectation, and every act of sacrifice became a debt I was expected to keep paying. I used to think I was cruel for imagining a life without them. Now I understand that what I was imagining wasn't cruelty, it was freedom. The absence of manipulation. The quiet space where I didn't owe anyone an explanation for existing. People ask, don't you miss them? And the honest answer is, I miss the version of them I hoped they could be. The father who saw me, the mother who protected me, the brother who stood up for me. But those were people I created in my mind, not the ones who raised me. And it's okay to mourn what never was. It's okay to let go of a dream that hurt more than it healed. What matters is what comes after. And what came after for me was peace. Not the loud kind, not fireworks or confetti or declarations. Just the kind where you can sit in your home alone and not feel lonely. The kind where silence doesn't hurt anymore. If you're watching this and your story sounds familiar, if you've been told that love means suffering or that being a daughter means never saying no, I want you to know something. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to start over. You are allowed to disappear from their lives if it means reappearing in your own. And when they tell you that you're being dramatic or selfish or heartless, remember this: you're not abandoning your family. You're reclaiming your soul. And that is never something to apologize for.